I'm finally here with a video on Satan's little season. And I know it's taken me a while to respond to this. And mainly that's because I wanted to give it the due diligence that it deserves, because there are many different people that believe in Satan's little season. There are many different teachers teaching about Satan's little season, and it seems not all of them fully agree with each other. So, what I've done is I've taken the two top arguments for Satan's little season, and I'm going to be talking about them in this video. To understand Satan's little season, we've got to look at Revelation 20, because this is where Satan's little season is actually mentioned. In Revelation 20, verses 1 through 4, we have Satan chained. And then in Revelation 24 through 6, we have the 1,000-year reign. And then in Revelation 27, Satan is released. In Revelation 28 through 9, we have the Gog and Magog war. And then in Revelation 20:10, the devil is cast into the lake of fire for the final time. And then Revelation 20:11 through 15, we have the great white throne of judgment. The two main proofs that they offer are historical documents from 70 AD that mention supernatural type events that take place in Jerusalem. So we're going to examine those. The other major proof that they offer is Matthew 24, where Jesus says, "This generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." And I am going to be breaking both of those things down in a way that I don't believe anybody's done yet, because I don't think too many people have actually understood Satan's little season. And the reason why is because it's a very new idea. This was never in our church fathers' history, the Ante-Nicene church fathers' history. This is a very new thing that's happened within the last few years. And so there's really no context for how to deal with this. But because I've studied it quite a bit, I think that I can talk to it and at least show you guys why I haven't fully patched on to the idea of Satan's little season. There are two historic texts that mention supernatural events taking place in 70 AD with the destruction of Jerusalem. Those who believe in Satan's little season believe that this is talking about the Great Tribulation, and this is also talking about the rapturing of the church and the start of the millennial reign. So let's check these things out and see if it actually lines up with the Bible. So in the first quote here, these are all from the Jewish War by Josephus, which was a Jewish historian. This is from book 6, chapter 5, and all of the references are right over here. You guys can check them out for yourself. The first quote: "A star that resembled a sword stood over the city for a whole year." That's a pretty interesting and amazing thing. I will give you that. There's no doubt that that is very interesting. Number 2, there was a great light around the altar. And here's the quote. It says, "At the same festival, the eastern gate of the inner court of the temple was seen to be opened of its own accord about the 6th hour of the night. A great light shone around the altar and the holy house." So very another interesting paranormal type supernatural thing. The third thing is the temple gate actually opening by itself. And this gate was observed, this is the quote, "The gate was observed to have opened of its own accord, though it was secured by strong bolts and bars, and though 20 men were required to shut it." Another very interesting thing that happens. And then another quote is, "A heifer was led by the high priest to be sacrificed. And when they were doing this, it brought forth a lamb in the middle of the temple," which that means it gave birth to a lamb there in the middle of the temple. Very interesting and supernatural thing for sure. The fifth thing is there were chariots and armies in the sky. That is pretty intense, and that is very, very amazing. The sixth thing is there was a voice from the temple, and I'm going to read that. It says, "A few days after the feast, a certain prodigious, incredible phenomenon appeared. For there was heard a great noise and a voice as of the multitude saying, 'Let us remove hence.'" The seventh, the prophecy of Jesus, son of Ananus. It says, "A man named Jesus, son of Ananus, who 4 years before the war, around 62 AD, began prophesying in Jerusalem, crying, 'A voice from the east, a voice from the west, a voice in the four winds, a voice against Jerusalem and the temple, a voice against the bridegrooms and the bride, and a voice against the whole people.' Despite being beaten and interrogated, he continued his prophecy daily until the siege, when he was killed by a stone from the Roman siege engine. Very interesting things, very supernatural things, and these things were actually spoken about by Tacitus as well. So there is merit to what is being said by Josephus. So now I'd like to actually compare that with the account from what the Bible said will happen. So in Revelation 8, 8 through 9, which is the second trumpet, we have a mountain burning with fire that's cast into the sea. And then we have a third part of the sea turned into blood, and a third part of the creatures in the sea that had life, they died. In Revelation 8, 10 through 11, on the third trumpet, we have that a third part of the waters became wormwood, and many men died of the waters because they were bitter. And then Revelation 16:4, the third bowl, we have rivers and fountains of waters that could become blood. In Revelation 9 through 9:15, we have the sixth trumpet, and this is where four angels are loosed, and they prepare and they kill 1/3 of the men that are on the earth. And then we have these cosmic disturbances in Revelation 6:12 through 14. It says the stars from the heaven fell to earth, and the heaven departed as a scroll when it rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. When you compare what happened, you don't see the same kind of thing going on. We have 1/3 of the water turned to blood, and then we have 1/3 of all the sea creatures dying. But when you look at Josephus, it mentions a very localized event, and there is no ecological things to do with the water in there. And then you have mass death, where 1/3 of humanity actually dies. In Josephus, you have mass death, but it's limited to Judea, and it's not 1/3 of the earth's population. Also, on a cosmic scale, you have the sun darkens, moon turns to blood, stars fall, heavens roll up, mountains move. This is a worldwide cosmic thing that happens. And in Josephus, it's more localized omens, like the comet or the star that was in the sky, the light around the temple, and the chariots in the sky, with no worldwide cosmic impact. And other shocking events that happen, you have great hailstones that were 75 to 100 pounds, and you have plagues that were worldwide. And then you have, in Josephus, you have supernatural omens like a heifer giving birth to a lamb and this voice in the temple, but they're all localized and seem very symbolic, and they don't seem to be physically destructive on a worldwide scale. And let me just say this, I do think that what happened in 70 AD is prophetic, and I do think Jesus mentioned it, but I don't think that it is the Great Tribulation as many of the Satan Little Season people believe. One thing too is we have other recorded histories for other nations, but we don't have anything that shows that there was a worldwide conflict, worldwide catastrophe, or any other things that would lead us to believe that 1/3 of the people on the earth died, 1/3 of the waters were turned to blood, or any of those things that we talked about that were happening in Revelation. So we're going to go through Matthew 24 with a very fresh lens. A lot of people have talked about Matthew 24, and I myself have talked about Matthew 24 and probably didn't really fully understand it. But I believe that after prayer and looking at this over and over and over again, that God has given me insight into what Matthew 24 means. And so let's examine it. In Matthew 24, we have a scenario where Jesus left the temple. In Matthew chapter 23, it tells us why he left the temple, what happened there, which is very relevant to what Matthew 24 is saying, and we'll explore that here in a minute. And Jesus says something very interesting to the disciples. He said, "There shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." And then in verse 3, when they sit down on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, and they asked him three questions, which I have color coded here. It says, "Tell us, when shall these things be?" And I believe that's in reference to what he was just talking about. And it says, "What shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world?" So there's three separate questions here. And if that is the case, then we should find three separate answers in Matthew 24. So the next section here, which I believe is talking about the end of the world, is Matthew 24, 4 through 31. I want to cue in on a couple verses in Matthew chapter 24, verse 4 through 31, that lead me to believe that at this particular point in Matthew 24, he is talking about the end of the world. In Matthew chapter 24, verse 14, it says, "And the gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." In verse 15, it says, "When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place," and it says, "Whoso readeth, let him understand." Telling me that, and this is in the original text, telling me that this was meant to be read by somebody who can understand this. It wasn't just meant for the people standing there. It was written down so that those who read could understand. In Matthew chapter 24, verses 32 through 35, it's answering a very specific question. He gives us a clue by saying the parable of the fig tree in this. And it's clearly starting a new paragraph, a new sentence, because it says, "Now learn." And it's talking about another subject, about what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 23 and in other places in the Bible. And I'm going to explain that to you. "Learn a parable of the fig tree, which his branch is yet tender and putteth forth leaves. Ye know the summer is nigh. So likewise, ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled." So, what I think we just heard there is a response to the question that the disciples asked: when will these things happen? And that question that they asked was in response to what happened in Matthew chapter 23. And so let's read it. I'm going to prove it with several texts. I think out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, we would have to prove this. So here we go. So we're going to have to find out, what are all those things? And so we're going to see what that is definitively. I can give you guys several proofs, but remember the fig tree and remember the generation. So here we go. It says in Matthew 23, "Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them which are sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thee like children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and you would not do it. Behold, your house is left desolate." Remember this wording, very important. In Luke 13, remember the fig tree. Well, Jesus starts talking about the fig tree in this. And interestingly enough, this is the same account, but from Luke, where Jesus enters to the temple and rebukes the Pharisees. So we find here in Luke 13, the fig tree parable. And we know that this is the same account that we read in Matthew 23 and 24, because they have the same exact verses on verse 34 and 35 of Luke 13 that they do on Matthew chapter 23. And so this is how it connects to that verse where it talks about the fig tree. In Matthew 23, it says, "Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation." This is exactly what I was talking about when they were at the temple. This is the conversation that Jesus was having with the Pharisees. And it was more of a rebuke than a conversation. So it's very clear that Matthew 24 and Matthew 23 line up exactly with Luke 13. And now we have context on what the fig tree actually is. And we also have context as to what is planned for the temple. And here it is once again, so you guys can see it with your own eyes. Luke 13, Matthew 23, almost word to word. And generation in Matthew 23 is the word, in Matthew same as 24. And then you have this judgment to Jerusalem. This is a specific judgment to Jerusalem. And then we have in Matthew 24, 36 through 51, the answer, what will be the sign of thy coming, which is, as we said before, a different question. So let's check that out. Matthew 24, 36 starts a whole new statement about when Jesus is coming back and what are the signs. And so we're going to examine that a little bit. And I think the reason a lot of people really get thrown off by this and don't know how to take it is because it starts out with the word but. But I'm going to explain to you why, and I'm going to show you guys some things that I think will blow your mind. So let's check this out. So the word but is day. And you can look at that. You see here on my chart here, this is what it means. And I looked at the Thayer's Greek lexicon, and this is what the definitions are. Now, I will say that this word can be used to add to as a conjunction in the middle of a sentence. But the way this one is used, it's used at the beginning of a sentence. And that word but like that is almost never used. In fact, nowhere else in any Greek history is used at the beginning of a sentence unless it is denoting that this is a new thing, starting a new subject, or in contrast to something else that was talked about before that. But here's what the Thayer's Greek lexicon had to say. It says, universally by way of opposition and distinction, it is added to statements opposed to a preceding statement. It opposes persons to persons or things previously mentioned or thought of, either the strong emphasis and often or with a slight discrimination. One of the other uses of this word is it serves as a mark, a transition to something new, which I believe is exactly what it's used for. In Dickinson's college commentaries, it says the chief use of the adversative particle is to show that a clause stands in some contrast to what has preceded. In the Cambridge Grammar Greek, it says basic function, a shift to new, distinctive text segments, often with the change of topic. And it says in moving to a new topic, a new argument, a new topic for discussion, or another aspect of a certain larger topic. In narrative, in moving to a new step in the story, shifting to a different character. Here is the ancient Greek in the Sinai Bible, and we see that Matthew 24:35 right over here ends, and you can see that somebody has inserted something with this arrow, inserted that in there. The King James Version did not insert that. That was added later. And then you see on the next page, Matthew 24:36, starting a whole new page and also a whole new sentence or paragraph. And we know that because on the other page, it didn't go all the way to the very end and continue. It stopped at a certain point. The day was added to the beginning of the sentence, showing that it's moving on to another topic. So obviously this isn't definitive in how we can look at it, but there is another way that seems like it might actually be even more definitive, just so we didn't get confused in case we missed what I pointed out. But in verse 35, Jesus says, heaven and earth will pass away. And we know that that hasn't happened yet. At least I can tell that we're still here. Heaven and earth are still here. And this isn't what the Bible prophesied as the new heaven and the new earth. And so if we use that word at the beginning of 37, the but there, it could be talking about the verse before it. And if it is, we know that that has to be a futuristic timeline. So that's what I believe about it. There's a lot more that we could have actually covered. There's so many different points and so many different things in eschatology that need to be factored into this simplified timeline that I put at the beginning of the video, because in between each one of those events, you have other chapters in Revelation that you can sandwich in all the way down there to the very end. And so obviously we're not going to be able to cover all that in one video, but I do plan on doing more series on this to shed light on this information, to see what people actually believe. I think it's important that we remain flexible on these things and see, how could this deceive me? How could it lift me up, and kind of go from there? I know that treating each other bad on the chats and treating each other bad in comments or emailing bad things or being rude to each other in person about this type subject, I think that it is a fruitless endeavor. So if you enjoyed this video, let me know by hitting the like button, comment, let me know what you guys think, hit the subscribe, and I can't wait to talk to you guys again. I'll see you soon.